Hi, welcome to Mediation Works. I'm Sharon Sutherland, and this is my colleague Wendy Lakusta. And we're here with our guest, Yuki Matsuno, who is doing a lot of family mediation these days. And so we're here to talk a little bit about what it looks like to be mediating in the context of families and couples separating and divorcing. And Yuki, I'm going to start by just asking you that as a big general question.
Sure.
What does it look like?
Well, it looks like a pretty natural process, actually. So what happens is when people come in contact, there's sort of two basic parts. There's pre-mediation, which means before the joint session where everyone gets together. Okay. And then there's the actual getting together. And then afterwards, there's a third part, which is drafting, and we can talk a little bit more about that. Okay. Yeah, so in the pre-mediation part, basically I get to check in individually with the folks and see if, you know, what they're up to, what the background is, where they're coming from, what their goals are, and also to make sure that mediation is appropriate for them. And then once I've done that with both and it looks like it's a good fit for them, then we all get together and speak about all the things that they want to speak about and get to agreements on things. And then the last part, of course, is to, putting that into an agreement. And that, again, is a bit of a more of a creative process that we could engage in together, but not, in one room, so to speak, as in the joint session.
Okay. And how much time do you usually spend with them in the pre-mediation meetings?
Yeah, so the pre-mediation meetings are usually about an hour.
Okay.
That's kind of the basic standard, an hour each. They can go a bit longer, a little bit shorter. And then in the joint sessions, it really depends. I like to book people for about 2 to 3 hours in the joint sessions, and there may be more than one. There usually is, because there's a number of things that people want to talk about.
Now, one of the things you said while you were describing the sessions was that the pre-mediation session, one of the things you're working out is whether it's appropriate for parties to be in mediation.
Yeah.
And I guess, my question would be, what sorts of things are most appropriate for mediation? When should parties be thinking that mediation might be a good idea for them?
Yeah, well, I guess in my view, almost anything could be appropriate for mediation. I think one thing that's important is that if there are children and there's going to be parenting together, joint parenting, then I think mediation is a great way to set that up, because you're going through a process where you're coming to an agreement about the parenting plan for the kids, and then they can base their experience in mediation, use that as a foundation to go forward, because they're going to have to communicate with each other and be co-parents for the rest of your life. So so it's a really great appropriate process for that, especially.
Right. So it's the starting gate to start building some trust and learning how to work together, like co-parenting.
Yeah.
So it models that for them.
Yeah, and it is exactly what you said. Like, it's a starting point. So it feels like an ending for people because it's the end of the relationship, but really it's the beginning of something else.
A new kind of relationship.
Yeah.
A parenting relationship.
That's right. Yeah. The way I look at it is it's really rebuilding the family in a way that sometimes it may not have been expected or necessarily wanted, but it can turn into something really positive.
Okay. Yeah. So when people contact you to ask about family mediation, what are some of the kind of common questions that people ask?
Well, one thing they ask sometimes is how long it'll take. I think that's the most common question.
Yeah.
That
and how much will it cost?
And how much will it cost?
Yeah.
So, and those are, you kind of give estimates or based on your experience. But I do tell people that you can't really tell until we, get to know each other and start. And so that's pretty common. They ask about, will there be an agreement? So that seems to be pretty important for people quite often, and also what the lawyers, how they're involved, or do you need lawyers, etc. So those are some common questions.
I have to say that's the one I hear the most, Yuki.
Yeah.
And it may be because, if people are phoning me, I'm not doing the family mediation, they're usually looking for referral.
Yeah.
So they'll be asking if I'm do I need a lawyer? Do I need to do these kinds of things?
Yeah.
And I have tended to say that, it's worth making a phone call to a mediator, and there's a lot of collaborative lawyers they might want to talk to too who have really strong mediation training.
Exactly.
But what do you say? Do you need a lawyer in a mediation?
Well, I strongly encourage people to, at minimum, get a lawyer for independent legal advice at the end on the agreement that they come up with. And that's sort of a minimum because ideally, I think people will have spoken to a lawyer or at least gotten some legal information before they start in on the mediation. Because mediation, it's a very flexible process, and at the end of the day, it's a negotiation between two or more parties. And so when you go into a negotiation, you want to have an idea of what are your obligations, what are your rights, what does the law say, how does it apply to you. Doesn't mean that you're going to end up with exactly what the law is going to turn out to be, but it is within the context of the law. So it's really, I think, important to get an idea of, okay, this is sort of the range that I can work with. And then if you've got both people who've gotten some legal advice, and then they both are kind of on side with that, it's really helpful.
Yeah, it sounds like it's almost two-part. It's meeting with a lawyer before the mediation helps set realistic expectations, and then they have an understanding legally what they may be entitled to, so there's no big surprises after the fact.
Yeah, that's really important. The other important thing in family mediation between separating and divorcing couples is this importance of financial disclosure. So that's in the Family Law Act. It says very clearly the importance of financial disclosure, and I really emphasize that with parties. So that's also something that kind of sometimes can go along with the legal advice as well, so to get an idea of that.
I was going to ask just some of the people we've been talking to in this series. They're really talking about mediation as looking very different in different contexts, and part of that is adapting to the specific needs of whoever's in the room. Who's there, what do they need. I'm guessing that family is another of those areas where you might change the process, where you might be trying to adapt to different people, what they need, different types of situations. Can you maybe give us a few examples of how that might look in mediation?
Yeah. Well, I guess in terms of adaptations, you can think about micro and then macro kind of adaptations, right? So in terms of like sort of the larger adaptations, like one thing could be like, how do you have your joint session? So, I've done some mediations over the telephone. Because of geography and things like that, but actually that can work quite well, and that actually sometimes can help in terms of if there's a very high level of emotional interaction that's still between the parties, then that can be very helpful to mute that a little bit. So that would be an example. Another example of sort of a bigger process change could be, who do you bring into the mediation? So and the standard is, it's usually the couple. Sometimes they bring their lawyers, and sometimes they don't. But in some contexts, especially could be the family's, particular cultural background or something like that. You might bring people in, like the parents of the couple. They might have something to add to the conversation, and it might be very important from a larger family context for them that those people are in. In terms of sort of the smaller adaptations, it could be things like, how do you ask questions, or what kind of questions do you ask? And it could be adapted to the people themselves and their relationship and their experience and what they might have shared with you. So that's a little bit more subtle, and it could be a little bit more on the fly. But I've I often had situations where I've had to give that some thought, and or who do you ask to speak first, things like that can be quite important. For sure,
for managing the process.
For
sure. So Yuki, mediation has a bit of a reputation for being a little more cost efficient, or hopefully so. That's what we hope for. And so the idea of bringing different professionals into the process would be quite expensive for folks if they're having to come and attend the joint session and that kind of thing.
Right.
So I'm just wondering, as part of the preparation for mediation, do you give people some homework and send them out to talk to professionals, such as financial people or accountants, or is that part of the preparation?
Yeah, definitely. So, and it's not every case that needs the professionals, but certainly if they do, then I do at the pre-mediation stage, if it's clear that that's what's needed, then I will say, maybe you should go and talk to a financial person about this, or a pension person about valuation and things like that. And then sometimes information comes up through the mediation process, and then at that point, people can be sent out. But I usually don't bring the specialists in. The professionals are out there, and the parties go out to them. Now, the other place where specialists can come in is even in the choice of mediator. So, some mediators are lawyers, and so that might be something that you want. As a mediator, you want that legal background and expertise. Other mediators are, child specialists, or psychologists, or social workers, and they might bring a different kind of expertise that's needed. For instance, if it's a high conflict issue, or if it's a particular issues with children, something like that. So it really depends on the circumstances. What kind of professionals you need.
Yeah, which is an interesting thing about mediation, I guess, just generally, that ability to select your own mediator. And to work with the other person to talk about what do we need and what kind of process does it need to be. That's just it's something you really can't do in other types of processes very frequently, right?
That's right. And really, the agreement on the mediator is the first agreement that the folks come to. So they agree on mediation, and then they agree on the mediator. So by the time they get to you, you can say, "Oh, that's great," that you've picked mediation and.
Your first agreement. Yes.
Very encouraging of them. So it's a good start to the process.
Oh, well, that sounds great. Well, Yuki, I want to say thank you so much. It was fantastic having you here to talk about family mediation, and it gives us a little bit of an idea of what it might look like and how very flexible it is. It sounds like there's just so many different ways it can be adapted to suit those parties, to suit the different needs, and I think that's a fantastic thing. So thank you again.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a great pleasure.